Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Guest today, Lucas Kraft. Lucas, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate you being here. And can you tell us, first of all, where you're calling in from and what you do for a living with Wonderbelly?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Lucas, and I'm in Austin, Texas. I am the co-founder of Wonderbelly. Wonderbelly is a digestive medicine company. We make clean digestive medicine. And what I do is, my official title is Chief Belly Officer.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Really it spans from product development to brand to creative is really sort of my domain.
That's awesome, man. And I suppose, thinking about, what got you interested in getting involved in this space? And obviously gut health, nutritional health, digestive health has kind of been seemingly a big topic of conversation in like social media and just in kind of like popular sentiment these days. So what did you kind of, find as you were like, thinking about exploring a type of brand you could create in this space? What were you trying to do a little bit differently or maybe better than what you noticed out there in the market that currently existed?
Totally. Well, that's sort of like, that was the main driving force of Wonderbelly, was how much I thought that things could be different. And so Wonderbelly really started out for me as somewhat of a selfish pursuit. I wanted to create this product for me because it just didn't really exist. And I can go into sort of the backstory of how, like, the catalyst to really how Wonderbelly came about. But as an idea and as a brand, Wonderbelly originated really in 2020. That's when came up with the actual product. But for me, the story really begins when I was 15 years old. And at 15, I developed an eating disorder. I was bulimic. And, anybody at any age, any walk of life, that's a difficult thing to deal with. At that age, I'd never heard of another man experiencing an eating disorder. So I didn't know really how to even understand what I was going through. I didn't know if anybody else would understand. So I kept it hidden for a very long time, for about 10 years into my mid-20s. And by the time I got to my mid-20s, I was ending up in ERs and doctors' offices because of the damage I was causing. And I was fortunate at that time to sort of be forced into finding recovery. And I was able to recover from bulimia, but I had done lifelong permanent damage to my digestive system. So at a young age, I was left relying on, typical over-the-counter antacids and different digestive health products to manage symptoms. And what I always say about these big brand name antacids and digestive medicines is they're really effective. They work. A lot of them have been around for decades, and our grandparents use them, and even their parents, they're generational brands. And it's because they're so effective. So I was able to rely on those for several years until 2020 rolled around. That's a scary year for, I think, everyone. And at the very beginning of the pandemic, an article came out that said Zantac, one of the, acid-reducing medicines that I was using, it had to be recalled because it contained a carcinogenic ingredient. And beginning of the pandemic, health is top of mind. Stress is at sort of an all-time high. And I see this article and I panic and I open my medicine cabinet and I have a shelf dedicated to Zantac. And the article did not mince words. It said this is basically no longer safe for human consumption. And I threw it out and I realized I've never really considered the ingredients going into my medicine. I've always implicitly trusted medicine, but I have been conditioned to be more speculative around ingredients going into food, beverage, and even skincare. There's, for over a decade or two, there's been movements around non-GMO, organic, clean beauty, all of these things, but realized that's never really occurred with medicine. And I looked at the back of all of my medicine bottles and noticed ingredients I really just didn't want to be putting into my body. So I looked for alternatives and realized there are no new medicine brands. And if I wanted change, and if I wanted this product and needed this product, would I be able to do this on my own? So I brought my brother in, and we both started really exploring, is this something we could potentially build? And we found gastroenterologists and pharmaceutical scientists who were, when we talked to them, extremely validating of this idea, and we're able to build Wonderbelly.
That's amazing, man. I think a lot of people kind of fall into that, kind of implicit trust to medicine, especially when the efficacy is so obvious. I mean, it's the things you use all the time. You know that it works. Thousands and millions of other people use it. So I think it is. It's really interesting, and it's always really fascinating. Even thinking about like just food and beverage. Trying to do things with cleaner ingredients that still have the functionality of from the brands that even though maybe it's not the cleanest ingredients, but that the efficacy is there. So obviously, I think this is kind of a macro trend across industry. So, and then I guess what kind of led you to the active ingredient that you're currently working with in this? That's maybe a little bit different than something you might find over the counter or some of these more like legacy brands.
Well, actually, the active ingredient we use is the same as the most popular legacy brands. That's exactly the one thing I didn't want to change was the efficacy. I wanted to keep that because really in all of these products, all I really needed was the effective active ingredient. I didn't need dyes. I didn't need all of these extra things in my medicine. I really needed the effective active ingredient. And of course, you need inactive ingredients, which allow for that active ingredient to really be delivered into your body, whether it's a tablet or a pill. You need to formulate it around inactive ingredients. So that's like one of the core things that we wanted to actually keep was these well-known, trusted, proven active ingredients to maintain the efficacy, but change the inactive ingredients to things that are more in line with like clean eating and clean beauty. And then on top of that, we saw a lot of other areas that just pharmaceutical brands and companies have really dragged their feet in. Sustainability, mission-based community building, these brands, Advil, Tylenol, you name it, these old staple OTC brands, they're very transactional. They have no community or brand love, no connection with the consumer beyond living on a shelf and in your medicine cabinet. And that was something that means a lot to us. So we realized, okay, this is something we can really grow and develop as a medicine. And there's, I can go down a laundry list of things that we start to notice, taste. Medicine doesn't need to taste bad. We can really do something that makes it enjoyable to find relief. And we just started sort of overwhelming ourselves with things that we were like, oh, wow, they haven't updated this in decades.
Oh, that's amazing. And I mean, I think it's important to, consumers obviously as well. I mean, it's important for everybody, regardless if they know it or not. But I think, from a new consumer base, the kind of older Gen Z/millennials, I think they really are affirmatively looking for these types of brands that are mission based, that are doing things sustainably, but still have that efficacy. I know it's been obviously problematic with, some types of brands that, try to do things with like all natural ingredients, whether it's beauty or whatever it might be, but it might be missing that really key, ingredient that everybody knows works really, really well. And it may have some efficacy, but maybe not to the extent of maybe some of the more traditional things. So I guess on the inactive ingredient side, can you give me some examples of some things that you found specifically that were problematic, and what did you do differently when you're starting to formulate your own products?
Well, so what we mainly looked for, it wasn't necessarily the ingredients that we could add or include that we were optimizing. It was the ingredients that we wanted to take out that just weren't necessary. Like I was saying, things like dyes and stuff like that. But we realized we could source ingredients that are non-GMO, make sure it's 100% vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, free of parabens, and then also free of like sort of the 7 most common allergens, things like that, so that you really have this heightened level of comfort with the medicine, with our brand of medicine, when you're choosing us. And yeah, so that's really what we were looking to source. And we realized after a lot of work and research that we could make this, like it was possible to do this. And we didn't need to sort of stoop down to just, any ingredient.
It's so fascinating. I feel like, when just from the outside looking into any industry, when you think about, healthier options for things you already like, so much of it is, alternatives to things that already exist, like replacements. But in your case, it sounds like it's more of just taking out the junk that's completely unnecessary and make sure the things that actually do need to be in there are done sustainably and non-GMO and organically, which is really fascinating because like I said, I feel like a lot of all the healthier alternatives are like differently sourced ingredients to make the same product that people people already like, which is really fascinating. So this is definitely, I think, a little bit probably different of from a product development standpoint than maybe some of the other, folks that I've had on the podcast. So that it's really fascinating. And so I suppose, when you think about, selling something like this, you bring it to the market in 2020 with your initial product, or I don't know how many, products you started with, if you had the line or if it grew from there. But what was your kind of general go-to-market strategy, I suppose, as far as, how you were looking to sell this? Were you looking to get into retail shelves right away? Did you start kind of more direct to consumer? What did that kind of look like for you in the beginning, and how has that progressed here to 2024?
Totally. So it was a really interesting progression. We had several really strong theses going into it. Assumptions that we made that we needed to prove out. Initially, when we launched, we didn't want to go directly to retail, even though we knew that's where this product's home would be. It wouldn't be online. The online D2C landscape has sort of dramatically changed from its heyday in like 2018. People still sort of cling on to maybe I can re-achieve that D2C dream, and it's gotten much more difficult. We're aware of that. But then in addition, our product, it's not a product that you necessarily buy online. It's a product that you need then and there, and you usually pick up while you're already out shopping. And so, for example, our antacids, we knew that going into it, but we needed to learn a lot before we put our product on a shelf next to these massive competitors, these huge brands, because people aren't used to new brands entering these shelves. So people aren't really conditioned to even browse for new medicine. If you have a headache, you probably already know it's either Tylenol, Advil, or store brand. Like, you already know what that solution is. You're probably not going to that aisle and looking and being like, time to explore different active ingredients. And you already know from childhood and what you're going to use. So it's not like most categories where you're browsing, looking for new brands interested. So we need to learn a lot. And so what we did is we launched actually exclusively online, not with the purpose of that's where our home would be, but that's how best we could learn from users and consumers, because once you go onto a shelf, there's a massive delta between you and any kind of learnings you can have with how your product's doing. We learned a lot. A lot of what we learned is actually that our theses were pretty spot on, and trajectory we had imagined after that was, okay. So, and then this point, it's sort of from bootstraps, build retailers from the ground up, and it'll be probably a very long slog, as it is for so many people, just hitting the phones, calling different natural grocers and pharmacies and local pharmacies all over the country, and just all of us just hitting the phones trying to get samples out and stuff like that. And we had this idea, it might take 3 years to really create a foundation of retailers that is substantial enough and maybe grow awareness to a point that, okay, now we can actually level up into mass retail. Year 4 or something, then we'll really have earned this right to get into what everyone is really, when you have a CPG product, you're like, that's sort of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is these mass retailers. But miraculously, not too long before we had even gone into retail, we ended up, finding an amazing partnership with Target and launched in Target basically 6 months after launch, which was very scary, but it was fantastic because
it's amazing,
that was like our dream retailer. That was we had sort of went from crawling to sprinting really fast, but our product we really identified as a product that would be fantastic on those shelves. And it was great to see that they recognized that too. And we found an amazing partnership, and we launched in Target. And the past year, we sort of in some ways skipped a lot of steps unintentionally. And there's good in that, but there's some cons in skipping those steps. But it was an amazing experience. I couldn't be more grateful that we have this opportunity, and because of that, it's really sort of catapulted the brand.
No, it's incredible. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm always interested to hear, how people kind of get their foot in the door at different like retailers or working with these like, big conglomerate chains, right? And I find, so many of the folks that come on, they did start like either right before COVID or even during COVID when all you could do was sell online. So did you kind of find that experience and have some success in that lane? Kind of gave you like a proof of concept in order to like go into those conversations with a little bit more of like a leg to stand on to say like, listen, like this is who our target demographic is. This is where we think it would work in the store. Like this is who's using it. And I guess to that point too, when you were selling D2C in the beginning, were you surprised at all from like the data that you could see? Because you're selling direct, obviously you have a little bit more like direct interaction, a little bit more information about who's buying. Did anything surprise you about who like kind of different demographics or groups that were seem to be like your most recurring customers with these products?
Yes, there was. And I don't mean for this to sound arrogant, but I was surprised how spot on we were with our theses going in. That was surprising to me because I thought, yeah, I'd probably deviate a little. Like generally we think it's this, but what we found was exactly what we imagined would be the case was the case.
It's amazing. Yeah.
In different areas. And, I'm somewhat, I think that's a product that result is a product of, and I think a lot of different founders and people who are like super users of their own product, they know it in and out. And so a lot of those like instincts and assumptions you can make really come from, they're not like blind shots in the dark. They really come from, for me, they came from years and years and years of using this product, picking up on who else used this product, how other people use this product, how they talked about it, because using antacids was actually a massive part of my identity. Because as a 20-year-old, being the guy who always has a roll of antacids on him, people that sort of starts to become a part of you. And at parties and stuff, it would be conversation. I'd always perk up whenever something about digestive health came up. And so, yeah, I was just, all of that information really came into use when we started to build this brand. But I would say the most surprising thing was, the demographic that we really thought would be most interested was basically exactly spot on. The splits were pretty much exactly spot on. And really a big thing is we wanted to understand, I mean, of course we wanted to understand, did people want this? Like, is it just me, or is this interesting? And we found resounding yes to that.
It's so fascinating. And I'm sure in turn, even organically, like obviously thinking about your own experience, optimizing that, obviously optimize the experience for, like-minded, like experienced people. And probably in turn as well, when you think about, the way that you want to market it, like what would make me buy this? You probably like were really messaging to that like specific group, probably, or just organically, just from like thinking about it that way. So that's really fascinating. I don't think it's arrogant at all. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm just always shocked, And if you don't mind me asking, obviously, I assume it's similar to people with your own experiences. But what did you kind of find was that exact demographic that like what was your thesis that ended up actually being correct? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we really looked at it initially as it was a primarily female audience between the ages of 25 and 45. And basically, it also came from a lot of, we did a lot of due diligence beforehand, researching and going through a lot of studies to sort of pre-validate these theses. But I mean, just like I was aware that people, when you think of somebody with HARP, a lot of people imagine sort of somebody from an older generation, typically out of shape, maybe like that's the person you'd think of as like the core user of heartburn. And but the fact of the matter is actually millennials are experiencing heartburn at higher rates than the generations that preceded them. I was aware of that because I talk about heartburn a lot naturally. So I hear how many other people similarly identified, but there's just so many factors that millennials and now coming up Gen Z are under that actually contribute more to heartburn than other generations were under. Stress, increased caffeine intake, alcohol, nicotine, the way we now work at home, we're crunched over a little bit more. Our stomachs are compressed. We're staring at Zoom. A lot of us get like screen headaches. We take ibuprofen. That tends to also contribute to heartburn. There are just so many factors coming at us. Spicy hot food, adventurous eating, that has become far more popular than it was in previous generations. So they're experiencing heartburn at really high rates, but not really being spoken to by existing brands.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's really fascinating. And obviously that kind of feeds right into like the target demographic that exists at Target predominantly as well, which I'm sure you knew and was probably, I assume, why that was kind of like your dream of a retailer for that exact reason, right? So that's really fascinating. And I guess, can you tell me a little bit about your experience working with them for the first time? I mean, did they reach out to you? Was it somebody you got in touch with there? And how was that process kind of like for you from, first contact with them to eventually, like striking your first deal and your first locations with them?
Yeah, so it was sort of in a way, a mutual thing. We had been put in touch with with somebody who was like, yeah, I'll sort of bring your product by to just show them. And the sentiment was, I do this like when we were talking with that person, they were like, I do this with a lot of brands. They'll look at it, they'll be like, this is cool, get back to us when they're ready, or like we'll check back in 18 months or something, and they're like, yeah, this will be a long process. And we're like, we understand. They passed it along, and it just so happens that Target got really excited about it, and we jumped on a call, and that call was just very much like a lot of alignment, a lot of like what we see, they were seeing it was great. It was fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, I think it just goes to show too. I mean, I know you were hitting the phones, talking to probably a ton of retailers and distributors. I mean, I think that's just that might be a forgotten part of what it takes to get into these kind of chains, or even in like smaller chains or independent stores. I mean, that boots to the ground effort is still as predominant today as it always was. As much as your online presence can be a big factor for selling online, or there's so many avenues you can go through online. I think just really doing those like real, just like down and dirty things. I mean, those opportunities will come if you keep at it, even though you might get rejected a lot. So I think for anybody listening who might be a new entrepreneur looking to get into a retail space with a product like this, I think it's super important. I mean, there's so much strategy that goes into your online presence and the branding and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, just as important is just getting your product out there, making connections, like expanding your network in those lanes, and find something that sticks to just run with it. So I really appreciate you sharing your perspective in that story. It's obviously a difficult thing for a lot of brands. It's kind of like getting into those conversations and getting into like an initial thing to an initial partnership to kind of take off on the retail side. So I appreciate your insights on that. And Lucas, I know I mentioned this before we get on the call. One of my favorite questions I always love to ask everybody on the podcast, which is basically, if you go back 2020, starting this brand again, if you could give yourself any one piece of advice if you were to start this business again, what do you think that piece of advice would be?
It's something that I'm constantly that I still struggle with, but it's definitely something that I wish I was more aware of while we were starting it. But I would say my perfectionism, and it's benefited me in several ways, but it's also been somewhat of a deficit in some ways, because if it were up to me, I would take forever. Like, no, it would be almost like I always want to see, like, can we make this better? I think it can actually be better, and so on and so forth. And at some point, we actually do need to sell a product, right? And a lot of the time I get lost in the process. And so I think, the advice would be, first take it easy a little, and then also, take a step back and reevaluate, is this like, because where I'm judging it at such a crazy, unrealistic standard that not one other person is looking at. Like I'll be looking at the packaging, and like I'll be staring at a word that I'm like, that can move 2 millimeters to the left, but to move 2 millimeters down. But then the spacing looks weird. Actually, no, that actually shouldn't be the word we use. Should we actually conjugate? Like, it gets to a crazy point where I'm looking at it as if somebody looks at this packaging and they're like, why'd they use the word "and" there and not the like, as if somebody else is looking at it like that, and they're not. And I need to sort of get over that. But it also benefits, because I think when you see our brand and you learn about our brand, you do see the level of, and it's not just me. My brother, who's my co-founder, he also really helps reel me back in when I get lost in this. He's fantastic at like keeping my perspective sort of in line with reality. But everybody on the team is just so incredibly thoughtful, and you really see that when you look at our brand, is how much thought we really put into every aspect, from flavor to sustainability to our language to how we're trying to educate, to the missions that we're sort of on to destigmatizes. You see the thoughtfulness, and it's not just sort of a, here's a thing, take it, you'll like it type thing. And so that's something I really appreciate about what we've made. And again, it's also a result of just, we have such an incredible team that I need to give a massive shout out, and CEO, who's my brother, just massive shout out.
That's awesome. I think it's really good advice, and you're probably not surprised to hear that. It's a pretty common answer I get from a lot of entrepreneurs. Like, a lot of entrepreneurs do have that air of perfectionism, which I think also makes folks, kind of able to take that jump into actually putting 2 feet into a venture project is because of knowing that they're perfectionists. There's nothing that we can't perfect. If we could perfect all the processes, we can't fail. But it's really interesting, and that is an answer I get a lot to that question. And it's like that old kind of marketing adage of basically, if you're not embarrassed by the first thing you bring to market, you probably did it too late, right? But it's funny because like there is nuance there, because in being so perfectionist and being so diligent with every part of the process and the brand, it clearly resonates. I mean, people can see it. So like it is important, but there's an important part where you need to stop too. And that's great that you have great partners around you to kind of keep that side of you in check. That is important, but can obviously get carried away like anything else. So no, that's amazing. I really appreciate your perspective on that. And Lucas, just want to give you a quick opportunity as well, just to be able to shout out your website, your socials, anywhere. And if anybody's interested in trying the product, seeing where they can find it, or maybe interested in reaching out to you guys for a potential business partnership, collaboration, whatever the case is, what's the best way to stay in touch with you all?
Yeah, so you can find us on Instagram. It's Wonderbelly. You can find us online, wonderbelly.com. And if you want to buy us, you can find us at Target nationwide. And now, as of, I believe, last week, we are now at CVS nationwide.
Oh, awesome.
Well, which is huge, and another sort of like jaw-dropping moment for just like as in milestones. And that's just, that's one of those things I walk into a CVS and thought, oh man, one day, and then that day happened last week. But well, you can find us in Target, CVS, and a lot of different regional grocers: Wegmans, Ralph's, Giant Eagle, Meyer, a lot of different regional grocers, and then online on Amazon.
That's awesome, man. Well, Lucas, I just want to say thank you again for coming on, man. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and knowledge of what you're doing, and also your transparency about your past with going through an eating disorder. I think a lot of men find themselves in that very similar situation, something that's personally affected some people very close to me. I know it's not something that's talked about enough in any circles, especially with men going through something like that. So I appreciate you shedding some light on that, as well as everything you talked about on the business side as well. And just want to say, I just want to wish you the best of luck and continued success in everything you're doing, man. I love what you're doing. It's an awesome product. You can tell just from the way you talk about it, about your passion. I think everybody that watches can see as well. So man, really appreciate you coming on, and I really look forward to staying in touch as well.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Lucas. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.